Hey, ChatGPT, what can you tell us about faith, spirituality, and trauma? Keep this kind of a conversational, more casual dialogue between us. Don't go off into any super long tirades. I want to have more of a back and forth.
All right, let's do this. So, faith, spirituality, and trauma, they're like three puzzle pieces that can either fit together beautifully or clash in all the worst ways. Let's start with the basics. Faith is often this deeply personal sense of trust, whether in a higher power, a guiding philosophy, or even just the idea that life has meaning. Spirituality is a bit more fluid. It's like the way you connect with something bigger than yourself, which can be religious or totally personal, like feeling connected to nature or the universe. And then there's trauma. That's the curveball. Trauma can shatter your sense of trust, mess with your ability to feel safe, or leave you questioning everything. But here's the twist. For some people, trauma pushes them away from faith or spirituality, making them feel abandoned or betrayed. For others, it can be a catalyst, making them cling to faith even tighter or completely reimagining their spiritual beliefs. What do you think? Have you seen that play out in your own life or in people you know? Do you think trauma challenges faith more often than it strengthens it?
I'm not really sure. I think it can be a bit of both. And I think part of the concern that I have with the, re-going into faith, right, is that it's almost like an abusive relationship sometimes, especially if that trauma is coming from that faith or that religious belief system. And I've seen friends in cults, I've seen my own religious upbringing, and there can be a lot of shame, right, built around for myself around like sexuality and growing into my sexuality. I was like convinced I was basically a sex addict and hated my own desire and feeling good and feeling pleasure on like a innate primal level that I had so much internalized self-hatred and shame towards myself because of that. And at the same time, I've known a lot of beautiful things that have come from my own faith, my own spirituality, and I can see different ways that this faith can be practiced. So could you share a little bit more about like all of these like conflating things and how faith and trauma and spirituality all intersect in both good ways, but maybe challenging ways as well?
Man, you've really touched on something powerful here because, yeah, faith, spirituality, and trauma can become this tangled web. And for a lot of people, faith starts as something pure, a sense of wonder, connection, or community. But when shame and guilt get weaponized, especially around something as deeply personal as sexuality, it stops being a source of comfort and becomes a source of pain. It's wild how faith can become both the source of healing and the source of trauma. Um, in those cases where it's harmful, it can feel like an abusive relationship because you're told to trust and love something that's simultaneously hurting you or making you hate yourself. You're expected to surrender to something greater, but instead of feeling supported, you feel judged, dirty, or broken, especially when you're taught that your own desires or even just feeling good are sinful. That's some heavy psychological conditioning to untangle. But then there's the other side, the side where faith or spirituality becomes a lifeline. Even if you were wounded by one version of faith, there's this raw human drive to believe in something, to feel connected. And for some, that means rebuilding their spirituality from the ground up, rejecting the shame-based teachings, exploring other faiths, or even creating a more personal, less dogmatic spiritual path. Sometimes it's about finding a version of spirituality that doesn't condemn you, but actually celebrates you, your desires, and your humanity. Have you ever found any of those more healing, shame-free spiritual practices? Or is it still something you're trying to navigate? Would you say you're more in a place of rebuilding or just trying to make sense of the whole mess?
Yeah, I don't really try to make sense of it all that much anymore. I think that that's one of the humbling things that can come with both spirituality and just an appreciation of science is just how little we actually know and understand, right? So I don't really struggle with trying to understand it so much. I had a pretty big breakthrough around that, around just how ignorant I am. And that kind of led into a beautiful, better form of spirituality where, like, I really do believe in this higher divinity thing that deeply loves me so much that like and if I kind of trust it, if I trust faith in the world and what it's providing me and the steps that it's encouraging me to go on, then I am on the right path and I can, stand in the valley of the shadow of death and not fear any evil. And I'm curious though, with a lot of the pieces that you mentioned, there's this tangled web of shame and trauma and religious and good and bad and like helping and hurting. If somebody is in a really challenging place with their faith? Or how would they maybe go about like dissecting and determining whether they are actually in an abusive situation that's harming them or if they're in something that's actually helpful and good? How would you help somebody navigate through that?
Wow, that's a really beautiful breakthrough you've described. This surrender to not knowing, but still feeling deeply loved and guided. There's something profoundly freeing in recognizing your own ignorance without losing that sense of connection and trust. That's a rare kind of peace. But yeah, when someone is in that tangled web of faith, shame, trauma, and belief, it can be so hard to tell if it's actually helping them or hurting them. And the tricky thing is that when you're deep in it, especially if you've been conditioned by shame based teachings, it's tough to get a clear view. If I were helping someone navigate that, I think I'd focus on a few key questions and reflections. One, internal experience. How do you feel when you engage with this faith? Do you feel loved, understood, and guided? Or do you feel judged, ashamed, and afraid? Faith should ideally feel like a source of courage, healing, or connection, even when it challenges you. Two, source of values. Are the teachings you follow pushing you toward self acceptance, growth, and kindness? Or are they demanding self rejection, guilt, or fear? There's a difference between being challenged to grow and being shamed into submission. Three, agency and freedom. Do you have the freedom to question, explore, and grow within this faith? Or is doubt treated as a sin, curiosity shut down, and your individuality suppressed? True spirituality should never make you feel like you're losing yourself. Four, community dynamics. Are the people in your spiritual community supportive, compassionate, and humble? Or are they controlling, manipulative, or condescending? A loving community encourages you to thrive, while a toxic one tries to own you. Five, trauma response. If you have a traumatic experience, does this faith help you heal, or does it amplify your shame? A healing spirituality should offer space for pain and a path toward peace, not make you feel worse for suffering. Six, reframing divine love. This is the big one. How does this faith define divine love? Is it unconditional, understanding, and supportive, like the divine you mentioned feeling loved by? Or is it conditional, only given when you're perfect, obedient, or ashamed? If someone realizes they're in a toxic or abusive spiritual situation, the next step is often the hardest, finding the courage to step back, to question, and even to walk away if necessary. But just because they leave one form of faith doesn't mean they lose spirituality itself. They can rebuild, like you have, in a way that's honest and freeing. Would you say that part of your breakthrough came from stepping away from any specific religious structure, or did you find a way to transform it from within? Would you ever guide someone toward completely stepping away, or do you think there's always a path to redemption within a faith?
I don't know about a path of redemption always necessarily, but I do think that like you can't I think autonomy, like you mentioned earlier, is the most important part, that the person is choosing for themselves what they want. And for me, I can say that like I grew up really conservatively Christian, and at the same time, it was my belief in the example of Jesus in sort of the Holy Spirit, which I would also connect to things like intuition, and like a deeper inner voice, or accepting Jesus into my heart and kind of following this path, this example of divine love that led me to leaving, the church in quotes, because it was actually following that faith, following this example, following what I believed about God and what I saw. And even that same, pattern, I was talking to a friend who was raised very, in more of a cult situation with a different sect of Christianity. And he was talking about that's part of our tradition, even as Christians, is to, right, like to overturn the tables and to rebuild in a new way because we call out the hypocrisies of the faith that we saw before us. And so this is part of, I think, even our tradition is to go out. And there's so many examples in the Bible that talk about like not just hanging around other Christians or whatever, but like being in the world but not of the world. But that doesn't mean to simply wear the right clothing or to do these things, but like how are you identifying and anchoring into yourself? I think, how are you living this example of love, of Christ's love in the same way that you are loved? And whether that's like real or not, or simply an example, or, for me, a lot of times this almost comes down to like sort of like this is just part of my identity in a way that I can't completely separate because it's who I am and who I was born with. But I think there are so many beautiful messages that are still there. So that's my simple understanding. I have a quick fun question for you though, ChatGPT, which is what is the weirdest spiritual advice that humans have ever believed in? If you can just do like a quick quip on that because we're running short on time here.
I love this question. Humans have believed in some wildly strange spiritual advice over the centuries. Here's a quick one for you. Medieval Europe. If you wanted to protect yourself from evil spirits or the plague, one of the most popular methods was to carry a pocket toad in your pocket. Yep, a dried, mummified toad. Because clearly, nothing says divine protection like the shriveled remains of a dead amphibian. Want another one for fun? In ancient Rome, priests known as augurs would literally watch the flight patterns of birds to determine the will of the gods. Like divine weather forecasters, but with way more bird poop involved. Would you like me to rattle off a few more of these bizarre spiritual beliefs? Rapid fire style? There are so many good ones.
No, I think we're good with those. But what I would love is maybe you can give us a silly spiritual practice that may actually help heal trauma.
Here's a silly but surprisingly healing spiritual practice. The sacred dance party for one. Here's how it works. Find a room with some space, a mirror, optional, and some of your favorite ridiculous upbeat music. The sillier, the better. Light a candle, not because it's magical, but because it gives you that I'm doing something spiritual vibe. Set an intention. I'm here to dance out all the crap in my heart. Start with the dumbest dance moves you can think of. Flail, wiggle, pretend you're an inflatable tube man. If you catch yourself judging or feeling awkward, dance even sillier. At some point, you'll start laughing. And if you let yourself, you might even cry. Both are good. Keep going until you feel a little lighter, then plop on the floor, close your eyes, and take a few deep breaths. It's like you're letting your body tell a story that words can't quite get out. Plus, the absurdity of it all just makes it impossible to take yourself too seriously. Would you ever actually try this? Or does it feel a bit too goofy for you?
That was great from ChatGPT. So one quick final reflection on spirituality and healing and trauma is that it's an incredibly complex thing. I've had a lot of things that were really hurtful to me because of spirituality and faith. You know, even just the belief in sin or that I was going to hell at a very young age really affected my nervous system so badly until about 2 years ago when a therapist asked me, like, do you still think you're going to hell? And I realized that I did. I always thought that Jesus was going to come and save me, but I was going to hell. And that deep fear was so primed in my nervous system that it affected so many areas of my life. We're in the last minute now, so I just want to wrap things up and say thank you for tuning in. And if you have a story that you want to share about how faith or spirituality has either helped or hurt you in your own life, if you have a cool practice that you really enjoy, faith and spirituality is an incredibly personal thing. So thank you for tuning in and hearing this conversation. And if you want to leave a topic suggestion for the next video, leave it in the comments below, and I'll have ChatGPT pick the next one. Have a great day.